On Wednesday, the 30th of October 2024, Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, will deliver her first budget. It's also Labour's first budget for nearly 15 years. Now, this particular budget has received perhaps more speculation on what she may do, what she should do, what she shouldn't do, than perhaps the last dozen or so budgets put together. Much of the focus will be on taxation and how to define what is meant by working people, something that, curiously perhaps, Sir Keir Starmer, an experienced lawyer, seems to find very hard to do. But for the railway, the well-trailed rumour that fiscal rules will be changed to unlock billions in capital investment offers some hope that several much-needed projects will get the green light. But we've been here before, so naturally, the optimism is being tempered with realism. The Railway Industry Association, or RIA, represents the views and objectives of the railway supply sector. RIA has over 360 companies in membership in an industry which contributes 43 billion in economic growth and 14 billion in tax revenue each year, according to their analysis, as well as employing over 700,000 people. So its views matter. Its CEO is Darren Caplan, and since taking over, Darren has overseen a much more proactive and energetic approach to thought leadership and lobbying. Recently, RIA published a budget submission to Rachel Reeves on behalf of the railway industry supply sector. So, in advance of the budget and the Green Signals special budget discussion that Nigel and I will be having immediately following it, I spoke to Darren about why this budget is so important and what RIA want to see contained within it. Well, I'm delighted to be joined on Green Signals today by Darren Caplan, Chief Executive of the Railway Industry Association, or RIA. Darren, welcome to Green Signals.
Hello, Richard. It's great to be on the programme. Thanks for having me.
It's good to have you here. Darren, let's just start with a very general point. I mean, the Railway Industry Association obviously is the trade association, if I can call it that represents the whole of the supply sector in the railway. So you've got a massively important role and, I suppose, perspective. 100 days of a Labour government just passed. Not been the easiest at times. What's your overall sense, and just politically, generally, and in terms of how it applies to the railway?
It's an interesting one. We passed 100 days a couple of days ago, and there's been lots of media speculation, or not speculation, but lots of media reports about how that's gone. From a rail perspective, I'm quite surprised at how it's gone. I was expecting a fairly seamless change in government. There was lots of similarities between their plans on rail restructure and investment, and the big issue also was public ownership. But apart from that, there was a lot of similarity. And then quite early on, we had the King's Speech, and we had Rachel Reeves talking about restoring your railways. And although that's not a huge budget, the tone of it was we need to save money, we need to cut costs. And one of the ways you do that is you cut capital expenditure at the Treasury, and it's easy to get it off the balance sheet, and you lose some cost. And so I thought, is this the future? Is this the mood music? It's all about the black hole. It's all about saving money. And my initial thoughts were, where are we going with this? Because I always want to give a new government a chance, see where it goes. I've seen its policy, the Labour plan for rail, and I was quite positive. There are lots of positive things in there. And I thought the first thing they do when it comes to rail, they start something negative. Since then, though, actually a lot of the reporting in the media is much more positive. You're hearing more about things like HS2 getting to Euston. You're hearing more about phase 2A potentially in HS2 being given a fair wind, and we've heard Lou Hague talking about a rolling stock, a rolling programme for rolling stock, which is something we've called for, and it mentioned the Labour plan for rail. There's a call at Siemens last week. So the mood music seems to be turning a bit, and we're hearing a lot more positivity about what the government's going to do, both at the budget at the end of the month, at its investment summit, which it started today. The mood music seems more positive. So the proof's in the pudding a little bit. It starts off being quite negative, then being quite positive in terms of the mood music. But obviously the big issue for our members is confidence. And when you heard the conversations being held by the Prime Minister and the Chancellor about things are going to get more difficult before they get better, we've got difficult decisions, things are going to be tough, immediately that says the next couple of years, you as rail suppliers are going to have some tough times as well. And so confidence in our membership has been quite negative. We did a survey fairly recently, had 50 members applying, saying that 96% expect a hiatus in work. And that's a pretty high figure so soon when a new government should be in. So my recollections in hindsight is that we do need more positivity about the future in order for confidence from our members. And that's in things like when they're going to invest in their teams, invest in plant machinery, invest in their business plans. So we do need that positivity. And so I'm hoping that's going to come from the budget at the end of the month. But the first indications were scary in terms of confidence, but more recently it has been more positive. So we'll have to see how that goes.
I agree. So that makes the budget at the end of the month really, really important. And as part of that process, RIA have made a budget submission. And fair play for doing that. Sort of getting on the front foot. What's the sort of the overarching theme of this in sort of, as quick as you can, really? And what was the motivation behind doing it?
Well, the overall theme is about sending a positive view about rail to the Treasury. Ultimately, the budget is the target. And again, come back to that point about it's very important we all see rail as an investment, not just a cost. So how do we get that cost? How do we communicate it? And RIA's record actually putting in submissions and then getting some positivity back has been quite strong. So a couple of examples would be when we did our manifesto back in 2019, the very first meeting I went to, Chris Heaton-Harris, then rail minister, literally held up our manifesto in a meeting and said, Darren, you'll be happy we're taking on board quite a lot of this stuff in our manifesto. This is about the long-term future of rail. Right. And then with the submissions to the CP7, Control Period 7, when it comes to operations, maintenance and renewal, we put in some submissions about what should be in there. And the high-level output specification for CP7 specifically mentions the supply chain, the fact you need early contractual involvement, the fact you need to iron out boom and bust, you need smooth pipelines and visible pipelines. And when I spoke to a DfT official after that was published, he was very clear to me. He said, no, we were very much thinking of RIA and its asks when we put together our H-loss for CP7. So the point there is that by doing these things, we do hope to influence and get across what our members and what the supply chain is saying of what's important to them. And we're not saying we can change the world, but we can actually influence some of the things where we have expertise on, which maybe someone in the Treasury or someone in the DfT doesn't have expertise on. So that's the point of putting the submission in the first place. And then our ask, we try and keep fairly high level, but there are some more granular examples in there. And particularly because this is a one-year budget. This isn't a 3-year comprehensive spending review. It's a one-year budget. And it's what do we want to see in this first year of a new government, starting from what we thought was going to be a bit earlier than September, but it's going to be the end of October. Yeah. And the 4 things we said very quickly are send positive signals to our sector. These say you're going to establish a long-term investment pipeline. Rail is really easy to plan for, more than any other sector. You know when track needs to be renewed or enhanced, or when new projects come along. You know when rolling stock needs to be replaced or refurbished. You know the score when it comes to signalling and the fact we need to digitalise signalling over the next 15 years. These things are known. They're not kind of variables you can't plan for. So we can plan for the future. So a long-term plan is very important. Secondly, and I mentioned this in my previous answer about setting a smooth investment trajectory across our key assets. So we know when things are going to happen. Let's start having pipelines that we can plan out. And you'll notice, even though this is the Treasury submission, Richard, we're not talking about budgets. We're not planning, we're not lobbying for more investment. We're saying whatever investment you're going to give us, do it in a smooth, predictable way, and then our members can react to that and get in play the skills and people and plant and machinery it needs. The third one is about leveraging private investment. If government can't invest or finance what the plans are for the future, why not allow private companies to do that? And incidentally, I was reading the Labour plan for rail ahead of this conversation, and it says in a number of places that actually it supports private funding for schemes, whether it's infrastructure or rolling stock. So we feel we're pushing against a door that is getting listened to. But obviously, given that the government's looking at bringing public ownership into the rail system, will that affect it ideologically? But the mood music from their own collateral is that it won't. So we're pushing on that. And then finally, there's some now or never decisions that need to be taken straight away. So one example would be HS2, getting HS2 from Old Common to Euston, which everyone knows makes perfect sense. You can't wait years to do that. You can make the decisions now, so you get that in train. And there's a few more things as well. So that's the nub of our submission there, Richard.
Okay, let's go back. So one of the things that's right at the beginning of this submission, and it's also on the homepage of your website, is this statement, I think was a report done by Oxford Economics in 2021 that says for every £1 spent in the railway industry, you get £2.50 of income generated in the wider economy. Now, if I could find an investment portfolio where I knew that if I went and put £1 in, I'd get £2.50 back, I suspect I'd have to join the queue of people wanting to do exactly the same. Why do you think it is that governments don't hear that, understand it, and go, it's a no-brainer? Why do we end up having this constant sort of cyclical debate about investment when it's that clear?
Well, they would say on the positive side that how many other sectors get 5 years of spending guaranteed in a control period? So, having 45 billion or 44 billion pounds specified is a really important thing.
But a lot of that is maintenance and renewal, Darren.
Yes,
It's not.
It's not new.
Yeah.
Not new stuff. And you're right. I mean, the Oxford Economics report talks about not just £1 generating £2 in the wider economy, but it talks about supporting 700,000 jobs, £43 billion in GVA, and actually money comes back to the Treasury. So we're talking about budgets here. £14 billion comes back from rail in the Treasury, and it's a really difficult one to know why government to support it. I guess it comes back to short-termism. And if you do see rail as a cost, if you look at it as, for example, HS2 Phase 2, if you look at that as £36 billion that needs to be that you can save if you don't spend it, then yes, you will save some money. You're not investing in it. But what you're not doing is looking at the future needs of the country. So not only is it rail important for jobs and GVA now, but in the future, it actually brings up economic benefits in our cities around the UK outside of London. It brings social value. It brings connectivity. It keeps engineering skills in the country. So we're in a way, you're asking for government. We're asking for government to look at the spending in a much more holistic way, not just pounds, shillings, and pence. And you could quite easily throw back at me right now the Green Book. The Green Book says, are these projects value for money? And I say, well, if you look at what governments themselves say, they do see the benefits of rail. It's the short-termism where they want to save the money, and you can kind of understand why. If you're a politician and you're never looking more than at the next election, and it's 5 years down the road, and 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 years down the road as you get closer to it, you might say, well, let's allocate this money to areas which has higher political value. And I think that's what happened with Rishi Sunak and Andrew Gilligan with HS2 Phase 2 in October. They're saying, what can we do in the next few months to have some good headlines and show we're doing things around the country? But look at what they're knocking out. Look at the benefits in terms of the schemes, the economy, the jobs, the connectivity, the social value. They're knocking all that out because they're not looking long term.
But Darren, isn't that not the real challenge, though? That even if the Treasury listens to this budget submission and all the other ones like it,
Sure.
Because, I mean, who can really argue with predictability, consistency, long-term capital investment? Even if they did actually come up with some of that, a one-year budget, could we really be confident in it? Because you mentioned yourself, restoring your railways, right? Great idea for some. The next thing you know, it's been cancelled. So are we always going to be plagued by short-termism, irrespective of what they say coming out of this budget?
Well, we've got to make the case together with all kinds of people that they should think long term. And I mean, the big failure for me with the HS2 Phase 2 was that the National Infrastructure Commission was set up a few years ago to take things out of party politics in that way, so that you said, well, it's adaptability over the course of 10, 15, 20 years. And rail is particularly susceptible to long-term planning. You can't do rail in the space of a couple of years. So I guess we always have to make the case. A lot of it's to do with attitude as well, Richard. I remember during COVID, the government spent money on keeping trains going to get key workers to care homes and hospitals. And they spent, I think it was about £14 billion a year keeping the system open. Now, this wasn't called for by the sector. This was the government saying, we want to spend this money to keep the arteries open. And now they play it back to us and say, "What? Why are you complaining? We spent 14 billion." That didn't come to the rail supply industry. It didn't come to the wider industry. It came because they wanted to keep things open. So the government's got to take responsibility for its own decisions. And another example would be things like HS2, things like the integrated rail plan for the North and Midlands, things like Network North, things like the rail network enhancements pipeline. These all things are let by government or promoted by government, but then government itself chops and changes them. Sometimes they U-turn them, sometimes they delay them, sometimes they don't make any announcements at all about them. That makes schemes more expensive. And then when you look at the numbers on a page, you think, oh, that's expensive. Well, actually, the original cost, if they'd stuck to it, wouldn't have been so high. So I think everyone's got a part to play in this. But
Okay.
yes, we will keep lobbying along with a bunch of others that government should see rail as a long-term game and not just look at the short term, regardless of electoral cycles.
One of the ways of getting it out of that is to make it a little bit more arm's length. And one of the ways of doing that is to look at sort of private finance, which isn't just a money issue. It comes with a structural issue and I say outsourcing, but it puts some of those decisions into a different place and gives you some protection.
Mm.
The problem with private finance is, I mean, there's really only two sources of money that pay for it in the end, which is either come from fares or subsidies. So since private finance is likely to be more expensive, is that unless fares go up to pay for it, the government is looking at high subsidies in the future. So do you think that private finance really does have a potential role to play here?
Well, we would say private investment because there's different ways of doing it. And there's financing, which is more like a mortgage, and then there's funding, which is literally putting money in for a project. Yeah. The government itself has said that it supports this. So let me read to you what it says. I've got the passages ready. With regards to infrastructure, there's considerable land value potential in unused rail-owned land, for instance, which can leverage sources of private capital and generate new income streams. So the principle is they're not against private money. And then on rolling stock, let me just get the passage for you. Over the longer term, we will develop a long-term industrial strategy for rolling stock, which supports British manufacturing, innovation, interoperability, and aligns with the wider objectives of the industry. This will seek to end the current boom and bust cycle, ensure a strong pipeline of work, and consider the best financing structures for future orders in partnership with private capital. So I guess my point is that I don't think the government's ideologically against getting more private money in, whichever mechanism it's using. We would probably argue that there is more to funding rail than just the taxpayer and the fare payer. If you look at things like Crossrail, what's now the Elizabeth line, money was used by incentivising developers and house building to pay towards it. And I remember there was a precept, I think, for in Transport for London, or the London Mayor, to help fund that scheme. If you look at things like retail and the cost that can bring you with King's Cross and St Pancras, and money's coming in from beyond the taxpayer. I guess it's early days. I'm not saying it's definitely going to happen. I'm not saying we're pushing against an open door, but I do think it's something the government will listen to. And what I would say is that if the government doesn't want to invest in these schemes, at least have a conversation about how it might be funded differently. Yeah. Don't say, well, look, we don't want to take the risk, and it's cheaper for government to borrow money rather than you. So, well, if that's the case, borrow the money. And if it's not cheaper, then let us take the risk. But don't stop things and then not borrow it yourself. And just one final point, I can see your dine's getting, Richard. We are hearing now that Rachel Reeves might be considering changing the rules on borrowing to invest. And if that's the case, then that might be a positive thing for rail infrastructure.
No, I completely agree. And if we see some changes to the fiscal rules around capital, as opposed to fiscal rules around operating consumption, then no, that could be very positive. The interesting point about these business rate capture schemes or land value capture schemes, which, as you rightly say, I think were used by TfL on the Battersea power station Northern Line extension, weren't they? The challenge there is, it's one thing when you're talking about London prices and rents and retail values compared to other parts of the country. So there is a risk, if we're not careful, that this is actually going to be quite a London-centric financing scheme, and the North could miss out again.
It's a very fair point. I guess what I would say is that given that Network Rail has devolved its structures, given that government's devolving its structures, given you've got people like Andy Burnham and Vernon Everett in the North finding ways of funding things, in Birmingham you've got Richard Parker looking at things, Scotland's doing doing its own way. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer to this. I think different parts of the country will fund and finance things in different ways. I think the most important thing, and I'm going to come back to my first point, is about positivity, because people won't invest if they don't see a positive future. And one of the things that concerned me about the scrapping of HS2 was that the second reason the government gave after costs was passenger numbers, and saying that we don't think there's a future in terms of, the less people can travel by rail in the future. And actually, a lot of people are travelling by rail now. We're virtually at pre-COVID levels now, if you include the Elizabeth line. And we did a report with Steer, an independent consultancy Steer group, did a report on the future of passengers and freight. And it shows that passenger numbers are going to increase by between 37 and 97% over the next 25 years. And the point I'm making here is that if it's going to grow, regardless of government policy, it's just government, more people will travel around in the future. you do need to invest in it. So either, as you say, you have to fund it through public through the taxpayer or through fares, but you have to fund it. You need more capacity. So we do need to look at other ways if government itself is not going to do it. And many of our members are interested in this debate. They want to take part in it.
One of the things you asked for in the report right at the end was, urgent action on a couple of things. And you mentioned a few, Euston was one, new rolling stock orders and getting some sort of predictability and, moving away from feast and famine. Electrification, actually, a sort of a steady state of at least 350 kilometres per annum. You didn't mention HS2 Light or whatever it's now called, or Northern Powerhouse Rail. Was that really because those are kind of issues that are in the hands of others? Or I was intrigued why. So there's two with HS2.
Yeah, there's two answers to that. One's to do with political strategy, but one's more to do with short-termism in the sense of this is a budget for 1 year, and we're literally saying what do we want to see the government do right now over the next 12 months. There's a comprehensive spending review next spring. We don't have a date for it. And a lot of things are happening around then as well. I think there's going to be a publishing of an industrial strategy, a transport strategy, an investment cycle. There's all kinds of things that are coming out next spring. And today they announced, in terms of industrial strategy, they're doing a green paper on that right now to publish later next year. So we thought that that's the time to target that particular issue. What I would say, though, and I think there's a political issue as well, we spent a lot of the end part of last year when we were lobbying all the parties, lobbying Labour, by saying, don't have views on this just yet. Don't get backed into a corner because, if you keep options open on phase 2, then it gives you more ability to do when you're in government. And we're starting to see that now. You're starting to hear these conversations about phase 2A from Birmingham to Crewe, for example. So there's an element of the fact we're focusing just on this budget and the fact that we think that's a bigger issue overall. It's a long-term issue, but we will be saying lots of it. And we do fundamentally support getting more capacity into the north-south line from Manchester to Birmingham.
I take all that. I suppose the only slight challenge, the immediacy challenge, is that there's compulsory purchase powers effectively in the current piece of legislation for the line from Birmingham to Crewe. And if we don't exercise those, because we haven't got all the land yet, there's a risk of that being lost. And then that would be a bit of a disaster. So I suppose there is a bit of an immediacy, particularly around land, if the two mayors' report is going to be followed, and we're going to end up with HS2.
I mean, we did try and keep the budget submission to the budget, but we're members of what's called the High Speed Rail Group, and they lobby on this as well, and we have been making representations on it. Sure. For God's sake, don't reopen the lines on the map. If you're going to get more capacity in, use the red lines that have already been put out.
Yeah, I completely agree. I suppose it's a final question then. Sort of we talked about that 100 days. I suppose you might say, well, kind of wait and see how the budget goes. But do you sort of feel more upbeat or unchanged from when we saw that Labour policy in April, and what's happened since the election? Where's your sort of overall state of mind for the industry?
So I'm going on a bit of a curve. Let's put it that way. So when I saw the Restoring the Railways announcement, I was very concerned, not because of that specific scheme. It was the mood music. It was the tone. It was like, well, rail's another piece of infrastructure we can cut to save money. Since then, we have had much more positive stuff, both on infrastructure and rolling stock. And so I'm hoping that the budget will be positive for the railway industry and our members. Our members are genuinely concerned, Richard. The survey I mentioned before about hiatus. We've got a Savanta survey we're doing this month, so we'll make sure you get the results for that. And I'll be surprised if confidence in that is still in a difficult place. So in order for me to be happy and confident and positive about the future, I need to hear the government being positive and happy and confident about the future, about rail, saying it's important to our economy, it's important to connectivity, to social value, all these kind of things. I would say one thing, though, while I've got the floor on this programme to the railway industry, and that is we've got to be positive ourselves as well. Even with the confidence issues, even though we're concerned about the market, actually the future of rail is really positive. If you look how many people and how much freight, the freight figures were positive recently as well. The ORR was taking 7% year-on-year increase on freight, and passenger numbers are coming back. The ORR is about 13% year-on-year increase in passengers. If we're not positive about it, we can't expect others to be positive about it, and we won't get investment in our sector. So my plea to everyone in rail is next time someone says to you, but it's not as good as it was 5 years ago, say to them, actually, the runes are good. Even despite strikes and despite poor passenger service levels in some parts of the country, the return has been positive. It's good. And the future is about growth. It's not about managing decline. And I think it's really important we say that. And we've got the reports to back it up as well. So I'm kind of optimistic, but we have to make it optimistic.
I think it's a really powerful point that, they say in financial markets, don't they? If the financial markets are positive about the future tends to be positive for financial markets, but equally the opposite is true. So that's a very fair rallying cry. Be positive, and hope that others, particularly in government, are likewise. Darren, thank you so much for joining us. It's great to see RIA putting on the front foot and being so proactive. Let's hope the budget is what we'd like it to be, and I'm sure we'll be having a conversation shortly after to pick over the bones of what's announced. But for now, Darren Caplan, thank you very much.
Thanks, Richard. Thank you.